Her ex-CEO husband's cruel mom invited her to his son's wedding, but she came with a son who shattered their wedding. The champagne hit my face before I could even react. Cold, expensive, and deliberate. It soaked through my midnight blue gown, dripping down my chest, pooling on the marble floor beneath my designer heels. 400 guests stood frozen in horror. The string quartet stopped mid-note, and Margaret Ashworth, the most powerful woman in New York high society, was screaming at me like a woman possessed. You were nothing. Do you hear me? Nothing. A nobody from Brooklyn who tricked her way into my family. And you think you can walk in here and destroy everything I built? I did not flinch. I did not wipe the champagne from my face. I simply looked at her, this woman who had stolen 21 years of my life, and I smiled. You sent me the invitation, Margaret. You wanted me here. You just did not expect me to bring your grandson. Beside me, a young man stepped forward, tall, devastatingly handsome, gray eyes that were unmistakably, undeniably Ashworth. He looked at the woman who had erased his existence before he was even born, and he spoke with a calm that made her tremble. My name is Dominic Monroe. I am 21 years old. I graduated summa cum laude from Wharton Business School. I speak 4 languages. I serve as director of operations for Lumiere Fashion House, the billion-dollar empire my mother built from nothing after your family threw her away like garbage. He paused, letting every word sink into the silent room. And yes, I am Julian Ashworth's son, the son you told him could not exist, the heir you tried to erase. But here is the thing about truth, grandmother. It does not stay buried. Not forever. The gasp that went through the crowd was audible. Phones appeared from every direction, recording the moment that would destroy the Ashworth legacy. And somewhere behind Margaret, I saw him. Julian, my ex-husband, the man I had loved with everything I had. He was staring at Dominic with an expression of dawning horror, recognition, and 21 years of regret crashing down on him all at once. But I am getting ahead of myself. To understand how we got to this moment, to understand the full weight of what happened in that wedding tent, I need to take you back to the very beginning. Back to when I was just a girl from Brooklyn with dreams too big for her circumstances and a heart too trusting for the world she was about to enter. My name is Vivian, and this is the story of how I was destroyed by the most powerful family in America, and how I rose from the ashes to bring them to their knees. Before we dive into this story, I need you to do something for me. If you have ever been underestimated, if you have ever been told you were not good enough, if you have ever been thrown away by people who should have loved you, hit that like button right now. This story is for everyone who was counted out and came back stronger than anyone imagined. Subscribe if you are new here, turn on those notifications and let us get into it. Because trust me, you do not want to miss a single moment of what happens next. I grew up in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, the kind of place where you could hear your neighbors arguing through the walls and the radiator clanked so loud in winter that sleep became a negotiation. My mother worked 12-hour shifts at a garment factory in the Bronx, her fingers permanently calloused from feeding fabric through industrial machines. My father drove a taxi, working nights mostly, coming home just as I was leaving for school, smelling of coffee and exhaustion. We were not poor in the way that breaks people. We were poor in the way that builds them. Every dollar was accounted for. Every meal was planned. Every sacrifice my parents made was an investment in a future they believed I could have, even when I was not sure I believed it myself. But I had a gift. From the time I could hold a pencil, I was sketching. Dresses, gowns, elaborate costumes that existed only in my imagination. My mother would bring home scraps of fabric from the factory, remnants that would have been thrown away, and I would transform them into something beautiful. A doll's dress, a patchwork quilt, eventually, clothes for myself that made the other girls at school ask where I shopped. Nowhere, I would tell them. I made it. By the time I was 17, I had a portfolio thick enough to earn me a full scholarship to the Fashion Institute of Technology. The day that acceptance letter arrived, my mother cried for an hour straight. My father, a man who rarely showed emotion, pulled me into a hug so tight I could barely breathe. "You are going to change our lives, Vivian," he whispered. "You are going to change everything." I wish I could go back and tell that girl to be careful, to guard her heart, to understand that the world she was about to enter had teeth, and it would not hesitate to use them. But I did not know any of that then. I only knew that I was about to start a new chapter, and I was going to make it count. Fit was everything I had dreamed of, and nothing I was prepared for. The other students came from money, from connections, from families where fashion was a birthright rather than an escape. They had internships lined up before orientation ended. They had trust funds that meant failure was never really failure. They had safety nets woven from generational wealth. I had my talent. I had my work ethic. And I had the unshakable belief that if I just worked hard enough, I could belong anywhere. It was during my junior year that everything changed. I had taken a part-time job as an assistant at a fashion industry networking event, one of those glittering affairs where champagne flowed like water and business cards changed hands like currency. My job was simple: refill drinks, clear plates, stay invisible. But staying invisible becomes impossible when someone decides to see you. I was collecting empty glasses near the bar when I felt someone watching me. I looked up and found myself staring into the most striking gray eyes I had ever seen. They belonged to a man in his late 20s, tall and lean, with dark hair that fell across his forehead in a way that suggested he did not care about such things, even though everything else about him screamed meticulous attention to detail. His suit was custom. His watch was worth more than my apartment. His smile, when he offered it, was warm enough to make me forget all of that. "You do not belong back here," he said, gesturing to my server's tray. "I work here," I replied, a little defensively. He shook his head. "No, I mean you do not belong behind the scenes. You belong out there." He nodded toward the crowd of designers and industry executives. "I have been watching you, the way you look at the dresses, the way you notice every detail. You are not serving drinks. You are studying." I felt heat rise to my cheeks. I did not know people like him could see people like me. "I am a student," I admitted. "Fit. Fashion design." His smile widened. "I knew it. I am Julian, by the way. Julian Ashworth." The name meant nothing to me then. I did not know about the Ashworth textile empire, about the generations of wealth, about the mother who controlled it all with an iron fist. I only knew that this man was looking at me like I was interesting, like I mattered, like I was someone worth knowing. That was the most dangerous thing of all. Our relationship moved quickly, the way relationships do when you are young and convinced that intensity equals destiny. Julian was unlike anyone I had ever met. He was curious about everything, passionate about art and music and ideas. He asked me questions about my designs, my inspirations, my dreams. He listened like my answers mattered. And he was gentle with my insecurities in a way that felt like healing. "I know I come from a different world," he told me one night as we walked through Central Park after dinner. "But that world is suffocating, Vivian. Everyone is the same. Everyone wants the same things. You are a breath of fresh air. You are real." I believed him. God help me, I believed every word. 6 months into our relationship, Julian took me to meet his mother. The Ashworth estate in Connecticut was not a home. It was a monument, a sprawling Georgian manor that rose from manicured grounds like something out of a period drama. The driveway alone was longer than the block I grew up on. The house had wings, actual wings, like a museum or a small university. I had dressed carefully for the occasion, wearing one of my own designs, a modest but elegant navy dress that I had spent weeks perfecting. Julian had assured me it was perfect. He had assured me his mother would love me. He was wrong on both counts. Margaret Ashworth was waiting for us in the drawing room, a space decorated with antiques that predated the country itself. She was beautiful in the way that expensive maintenance makes women beautiful, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her posture impeccable, her eyes sharp as cut glass. She did not stand when we entered. She simply looked at me, her gaze traveling from my shoes to my hair and back again, cataloging every detail, finding every flaw. "So," she said, her voice cool and measured, "this is the girl. Not this is Vivian. Not lovely to meet you. Just this is the girl." Like I was a specimen, an exhibit, something to be examined and ultimately discarded. "Mother," Julian said, and I heard a warning in his tone. "This is Vivian, the woman I told you about, the one I love." Margaret's lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. "How charming. Tell me, Vivian, what does your family do?" "My mother works in a garment factory. My father drives a taxi." The words came out steady, though my heart was racing. Margaret's expression did not change, but something behind her eyes did. A hardening, a closing off. "I see. And what are your intentions with my son?" "I love him," I said simply. "That is my intention. to love him. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she rose, smoothing her skirt with practiced grace. "Julian, a word in private, please." She swept from the room without looking at me again. Julian squeezed my hand, whispered that everything would be fine, and followed her. I stood alone in that vast, cold room, surrounded by portraits of Ashworth ancestors who seemed to be looking down at me with the same disdain as their living descendant. And I told myself it did not matter. Julian loved me. That was what mattered. But even then, some small part of me knew I was not welcome here. I would never be welcome here. Whatever Margaret said to Julian that day, it did not change his mind. If anything, it seemed to strengthen his resolve. He proposed 3 months later, on the rooftop of my tiny Brooklyn apartment, with a ring that probably cost more than the building itself. "I want to spend my life with you," he said, tears in his eyes. "I do not care what anyone thinks. I do not care about any of it. I only care about you." I said yes. Of course I said yes. I was 20 years old and desperately in love, and convinced that we could overcome anything as long as we had each other. The wedding was a society affair, the kind of event that gets covered in magazines and talked about in whispers. Margaret had insisted on planning everything, and though I fought her on some details, I eventually gave in. I was trying to make peace. I was trying to prove that I could belong in her world. The night before the ceremony, Margaret found me alone in the bridal suite. I was sitting at the vanity, practicing my vows, when she appeared in the doorway like a specter. "You look nervous," she observed. "Just excited," I replied, forcing a smile. She crossed the room and stood behind me, meeting my eyes in the mirror. "I want you to know something," she said, her voice almost kind. "I have spent 40 years building this family, protecting it, ensuring its survival. Julian is my only child, my only heir. Everything I have done for him." "I understand," I said. "No." She placed her hands on my shoulders, and I felt the pressure of her grip like a warning. "You do not. Not yet. But you will. Enjoy tomorrow, Vivian. Enjoy being a bride. But never forget that you are entering my house. And in my house, we play by my rules." She left before I could respond, and I told myself she was just being protective, just being a mother. I told myself it would get better once she saw how much I loved her son. I was so naive. The first 2 years of our marriage were a strange mixture of happiness and erosion. Julian was loving, attentive, everything a husband should be. But Margaret was always there, a shadow that never quite disappeared. She criticized my housekeeping, my cooking, my fashion choices. She scheduled family events without consulting me. She made comments, small and sharp, designed to remind me that I was an outsider. "You must be so overwhelmed by all of this," she would say sweetly. "It is a lot to take in for someone from your background." Or at dinner parties, gesturing to my outfit, "Vivian made that dress herself. Is it not charming?" "She is so resourceful." Julian tried to defend me at first, but Margaret had decades of practice in manipulation. She would cry, claim I was turning her son against her, accuse me of being ungrateful for everything she had done. And slowly, painfully, I watched Julian start to pull away. "It is just easier if you go along with her," he would say. "She means well. She just has trouble expressing it." I tried. God, I tried. I suppressed my own ambitions, my own dreams of starting a fashion line. I played the dutiful daughter-in-law. I smiled through the insults and swallowed my pride. And then I discovered I was pregnant. The moment I saw those 2 pink lines, everything changed. Suddenly, all the petty grievances and power plays seemed meaningless. I was going to be a mother. Julian and I were going to have a family, our own family. I planned to tell him over a special dinner. I bought his favorite wine, cooked his favorite meal, and rehearsed a dozen different ways to share the news. I was bursting with joy, convinced that this would be the thing that finally brought us together, that finally gave us something Margaret could not touch. But when Julian came home that night, he was not alone. Margaret walked in behind him, her face arranged in an expression of cold triumph. She was holding a manila envelope, the kind that suggests legal documents or devastating news. "We need to talk," Julian said, and his voice was ice. "What is going on?" I asked, looking between them. Margaret set the envelope on the table and opened it, spreading photographs across the surface. Photos of me having coffee with a colleague from FIT. Photos of me laughing with a male friend at a gallery opening. Photos that were innocent, completely innocent, but staged and angled to suggest something more. Care to explain these? Margaret asked. Those are friends, I said, my voice rising. Those are completely innocent interactions. A friend does not look at another woman's husband like that. Margaret sneered. A friend does not meet in secret, in dark corners, in intimate settings. That is not what happened. That is not. I turned to Julian, desperate. You know me. You know I would never betray you. These photos are taken out of context. Someone is trying to make them look like something they are not. But Julian was not looking at me. He was looking at his mother, and there was something broken in his expression, something that had already been poisoned beyond repair. There is more, Margaret said, her voice dropping to something almost gentle. The cruelest blow delivered with false kindness. Julian, darling, I did not want to tell you this way, but the doctors confirmed years ago, you cannot father children. If Vivian is pregnant, which I suspect she might be, given her recent behavior, then that child is not yours. The world stopped. I felt like I had been physically struck. The pregnancy test I had planned to share as joyous news was now being wielded against me like a weapon. That is a lie, I whispered. I do not know what you are talking about, but that is a lie. I have never been with anyone but Julian. Ever. Julian's face was a mask of pain. He would not meet my eyes. Is it true? He asked. Are you pregnant? Yes, I said, and I was crying now. Yes, I am pregnant. With your child, our child. Julian, please, you have to believe me. But Margaret moved between us, her hand on Julian's arm, her voice soft and poisonous. I know this is hard, darling. I know you loved her. But the facts are the facts. You cannot father children. She has been seen with other men, and now she claims to be pregnant. What other conclusion can we draw? Julian looked at me then, and I saw it. The death of everything we had been. The trust draining from his eyes like water through a broken dam. Get out, he said quietly. Julian, please. Get out of my house. Now. I tried to argue, tried to explain, tried to make him see reason. But Margaret had done her work too well. The photographs, the fake medical diagnosis, the years of subtle manipulation, it had all been building to this moment. She had planted seeds of doubt, and now she was reaping her harvest. The next morning, divorce papers arrived. A team of lawyers, all employed by the Ashworth family, explained my options in terms that made clear I had none. I could sign quietly and receive a modest settlement, or I could fight and lose everything. One of Margaret's conditions was a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. I could never speak publicly about the Ashworths, never reveal details of our marriage, never mention the pregnancy or any claims of paternity. If I violated this agreement, I would be sued into oblivion. I was 22 years old, pregnant, and utterly alone. And so I signed. The last time I saw Margaret before leaving the estate, she cornered me in the hallway. I want you to understand something, she said, her voice perfectly pleasant. Whatever child you are carrying, it will never be acknowledged as an Ashworth. Julian cannot have children. The doctors confirmed it. So either you were unfaithful or you are lying. Either way, that bastard will never set foot in this family. She smiled then, a smile that still haunts me. Now run along back to Brooklyn where you belong. I walked out of the Ashworth estate with nothing but a suitcase and the clothes on my back. It was raining, a cold October rain that soaked through my coat and plastered my hair to my face. The driveway seemed endless, stretching before me like a road into darkness. I had no money, no job, no connections. The fashion industry in New York was small, and Margaret had already made calls. Doors that might have opened for a talented young designer were now firmly closed. But I had one thing she could not take from me, the baby growing inside me. Julian's baby, no matter what lies Margaret told. I knew the truth, even if no one else believed me. I moved back in with my parents, squeezing into my childhood bedroom, swallowing my pride with every passing day. My mother held me while I cried. My father worked extra shifts to cover my medical expenses. They never once blamed me, never once suggested I had brought this on myself. You are going to get through this, my mother told me every night. You are stronger than you know. I did not believe her. Not then. But I kept going anyway, because what else could I do? The pregnancy was difficult. Stress, grief, and financial hardship took their toll. I spent too many nights lying awake, wondering how I was going to provide for this child. how I was going to build a life from the wreckage of my dreams. And then, on a cold March morning, Dominic was born. Let me pause here for a moment. If this story is hitting you in the heart, if you are rooting for Vivian and baby Dominic, I need you to drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever had to rebuild your entire life from nothing? Have you ever been betrayed by people who should have loved you? Share your story. And if you have not already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because trust me, the best part of this story is still coming. Now let us continue. The moment I held my son for the first time, everything changed. He was so small, so perfect, wrapped in a hospital blanket that had seen better days. The delivery room was modest, nothing like the luxury suite I had imagined during my marriage. But none of that mattered, because when I looked into his eyes, I saw Julian staring back at me. Gray eyes, unmistakably, undeniably gray, the Ashworth gray that had marked their family for generations. Margaret had called him a bastard. She had said he would never be acknowledged, but looking at him now, I knew the truth that she had tried so desperately to hide. This was Julian's son. This was an Ashworth, whether they claimed him or not. And I was going to make sure he never needed their claim. I am going to give you everything, I whispered to him. I am going to build a world where you never have to beg anyone for anything. I promise you that. It was a promise I intended to keep. The first year was survival, pure and simple. I could not work a traditional job, not with a newborn and no childcare. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I sewed. My parents had given me their old sewing machine, a battered Singer that had belonged to my grandmother. I set it up in the corner of my childhood bedroom, between the crib and the window, and I started creating. During the day, I cared for Dominic. I fed him, changed him, walked him around the block in a second-hand stroller, learned the rhythms of motherhood one exhausted hour at a time. But at night, after he was asleep, I worked. I made dresses from fabric scraps just like I had as a child. I designed pieces that were simple but elegant, affordable but distinctive. I photographed them on a bedsheet backdrop and posted them on early social media platforms, long before influencer culture was a thing. The first month, I sold nothing. The second month, I sold one dress to a woman in New Jersey for $40. The third month, I sold 3 dresses, then 5, then 12. By the end of the first year, I had made just enough money to rent a tiny studio apartment for Dominic and me. It was barely bigger than my parents' bedroom, with a kitchen that was really just a hot plate and a mini fridge. But it was ours. I named my business Lumiere, French for light, because in the darkest period of my life, my son had been a light that guided me forward, and I wanted to create beautiful things that made other people feel that same kind of hope. There were setbacks. Of course, there were setbacks. I remember a night when Dominic was 18 months old, running a fever that would not break. I had no insurance, no money for a doctor. I spent hours in a free clinic waiting room, holding my crying baby, surrounded by other mothers just as desperate as I was. I remember the rejection letters from boutiques that did not want to carry my designs, the suppliers who demanded payment terms I could not meet, the times when I had to choose between buying fabric and buying groceries. But I also remember the victories. The first time a fashion blogger featured my work, calling it effortlessly chic and surprisingly sophisticated for the price point. The first time I hired an employee, a single mother like myself who needed flexible hours. The first time I saw a stranger on the street wearing one of my dresses. That last moment stopped me in my tracks. I was walking Dominic home from daycare, 3 years into building the business, when I spotted her. A young woman about my age, wearing a blue wrap dress I had designed the previous summer. She was laughing with a friend, completely unaware that the designer was standing 10 feet away, fighting back tears. "Mommy, why are you crying?" Dominic asked, tugging at my hand. "Because I am happy," I told him. "I am so happy." By the time Dominic was 5, Lumiere had grown beyond anything I had imagined. We had moved out of the tiny studio and into a real apartment, one with a separate bedroom for Dominic and a workspace where I could design without stepping over toys. I had a small team now, 4 employees who believed in what we were building. By the time he was 8, we had our own storefront in Brooklyn, a small boutique with my name on the door. By the time he was 12, Lumiere had expanded to 3 locations and was generating 7 figures in annual revenue. But the real breakthrough came when Dominic was 15. A celebrity, I will not name names, but she was one of the biggest stars in the world at the time, was photographed leaving a restaurant in Los Angeles. She was wearing a Lumiere dress, not because we had sent it to her, not because we had paid for placement, but because her stylist had discovered us online and thought the dress was perfect for her. The photo went viral. Our website crashed from traffic. Orders flooded in faster than we could process them. Within a year, we had opened flagship stores in Manhattan, Los Angeles, and Miami. Within 2 years, we were showing at New York Fashion Week. Within 5 years, Lumiere had become a billion-dollar company, and I had become one of the most successful fashion entrepreneurs in the country, all while raising a son as a single mother, all while carrying a secret that could have destroyed everything. I had never told Dominic the full truth about his father, not because I wanted to deceive him, but because I wanted to protect him. He knew his father was a man named Julian, a man from a wealthy family who had not been ready to be a parent. He knew the relationship had ended badly, but he did not know the details, the depth of the betrayal, the cruelty of his grandmother's lies. That changed when he was 16. Dominic had always been curious, intelligent, the kind of kid who noticed everything and filed it away for later analysis. He had found old photographs of Julian and me tucked in a box at the back of my closet. He had done research, connected dots, discovered that his father was not just some anonymous wealthy man, but Julian Ashworth, CEO of one of the largest textile companies in America. He confronted me one evening after I came home from a meeting. "Mom, we need to talk." He showed me what he had found. Articles about the Ashworth family, photos of Julian at society events, a business profile that mentioned his wife Camille and their son Sebastian, born just a year after our divorce was finalized. I did not lie to him. I could not anymore. So I told him everything. The marriage, Margaret's manipulation, the false accusations, the lie about Julian's supposed sterility, the way I had been cast out, pregnant and penniless, branded as an adulteress and forbidden to speak the truth. Dominic listened in silence, his gray eyes, Julian's eyes, unreadable. When I finished, he asked only one question: "Is there proof?" I had thought about this for years. The possibility of proving the truth, the DNA evidence that could vindicate me and establish Dominic as Julian's legitimate heir. But pursuing it had always seemed risky, potentially exposing Dominic to the same cruelty I had endured. But my son was not asking me to pursue anything. He was asking if proof existed. Yes, I told him. DNA would prove everything. He nodded slowly. Then let us get it. It took months to orchestrate. Julian was a public figure, but he was also careful about his privacy. We could not simply walk up to him and ask for a sample. So we waited. We watched. And eventually, an opportunity presented itself. A charity gala. One of those events where the wealthy gather to congratulate themselves on their generosity. Julian was a keynote speaker, and after his speech, he left his coffee cup on the podium. Dominic was there as my +1, dressed in a suit I had designed for him, looking every inch the young professional. While I distracted the event staff with conversation, he collected the cup. 2 weeks later, we had results. 99.98% probability of paternity. Dominic was, without any doubt, Julian Ashworth's biological son. I expected my son to be angry, to demand confrontation, justice, recognition. But Dominic surprised me, as he always did. "I do not want their money," he said, holding the test results. "I do not want their name. I have your name, and it is worth more than theirs will ever be." "Then, what do you want?" I asked. He looked at me with those gray eyes, so much like his father's, but filled with a wisdom Julian had never possessed. "I want them to know the truth someday, not for revenge, but because lies should not win, because you deserve to have your name cleared. When the time is right." We agreed to wait, to continue building our lives, our success, our legacy. We agreed that if the opportunity ever presented itself, we would be ready. And then, 5 years later, the invitation arrived. Let me tell you something about the woman I had become by the time that cream-colored envelope landed on my desk. I was no longer the naive girl who had walked into the Ashworth estate, hoping to be accepted. I was the CEO of a fashion empire. I employed over 200 people. I had graced the covers of business magazines and been profiled in documentaries about female entrepreneurship. I had also found love again. His name was Marcus, an architect who had designed our Manhattan headquarters. He was kind, patient, completely secure in his own identity. He did not care about my past or my secrets. He loved me for who I was, and he loved Dominic like a son. We had been together for 5 years. He had proposed 6 months before the invitation arrived, with a simple diamond ring and a speech that made me cry. I had said yes, finally ready to believe that I deserved happiness. But the invitation threatened to disrupt all of it. It reached into my carefully constructed present and dragged the past back into the light. You are cordially invited to celebrate the union of Sebastian Ashworth and Isabella Fontaine. Sebastian, Julian's other son. The son Margaret had deemed legitimate, acceptable, worthy of the Ashworth name. He was getting married, and for some reason, I had been invited. I knew immediately that this was not an olive branch. This was Margaret asserting her dominance one final time. She wanted me to see the Ashworth legacy continuing without me. She wanted to parade her victory, probably expecting that I was still struggling somewhere, still broken by what she had done. She did not know about Lumiere. She did not know about my success. And she certainly did not know about Dominic. When my son found me holding that invitation, his reaction was immediate. "We have to go." I looked at him, this young man who had grown into someone extraordinary. 21 years old, Wharton graduate, fluent in 4 languages, already making his mark as director of operations at Lumiere. He had his father's gray eyes, but his father had nothing else to claim in him. Everything Dominic was, I had helped him become. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Once we walk through those doors, there is no going back." Dominic smiled, and there was something fierce in his expression. "Mom, you spent 21 years protecting me. You built an empire while raising me alone. You never once complained, never once made me feel like a burden. Now it is my turn. Let me help you face them. Let me show them what they lost." I looked at the invitation again, at the elegant calligraphy and the Ashworth crest embossed in champagne gold. For 2 decades I had played by Margaret's rules. I had kept silent, built my success in the shadows, let her believe she had won. But I was not that scared girl anymore. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for the truth to finally come out. "Okay," I said. "Let us do this." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. I contacted Arthur Vance, my attorney for the past decade, a man who had helped me navigate every legal challenge Lumiere had faced. I told him everything, showed him the DNA test, the medical records we had obtained, the evidence we had gathered over the years. Arthur's response was immediate. "This is explosive. If we go public with this, it will destroy them." "That is not what we want," I said. "I do not want revenge. I want the truth to be known. There is a difference." He nodded slowly. "Then let us prepare for every scenario. If Margaret tries to retaliate, we need to be ready." We gathered everything. Documentation of Margaret's lies about Julian's fertility, evidence of the fabricated affair accusations, financial records, corporate documents, everything that might be relevant. Arthur put together what he called the file, a comprehensive dossier that could be deployed if necessary. Dominic, meanwhile, reached out to his own contacts, former Ashworth employees who had witnessed Margaret's manipulations, society insiders who knew the truth about her ruthless tactics. He built a network of allies we did not even know we had, and I prepared myself emotionally. I saw a therapist, processed decades of suppressed trauma, worked through the anger and grief that I had buried beneath ambition and success. By the time the wedding day arrived, I felt something I had not felt in 21 years. I felt ready. The morning of the wedding, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror and looked at the woman staring back at me. She was 42 years old, her dark hair swept into an elegant updo, her face showing the lines that come with living and surviving. She wore a midnight blue gown of her own design, a masterpiece of silk that moved like water when she walked. Simple jewelry, minimal makeup, nothing flashy, nothing desperate to prove, just quiet, undeniable power. Marcus came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "You look stunning," he said. "Are you sure you do not want me there?" I had debated bringing him, but this was something I needed to do with Dominic, just the 2 of us. Marcus understood. "I need to do this alone," I said. "Well, not alone, with Dominic, but you know what I mean." He kissed my cheek. "I will be right here when you get back, no matter what happens." Dominic was waiting by the door, devastatingly handsome in a custom black tuxedo. He looked like Julian in so many ways, but his expression held a confidence and groundedness that Julian had never possessed. My son was not a man who needed external validation. He knew exactly who he was. "Ready?" he asked. I took one last look around the home I had built, at the evidence of a life reclaimed and reconstructed. Then I picked up my clutch, tucked the file inside, and nodded. Let us go remind them what they threw away. The drive to Connecticut took just over 2 hours. We rode in comfortable silence for most of it, the autumn landscape passing outside the windows in shades of amber and gold. I found myself thinking about the last time I had made this drive, 21 years ago, rain streaking down the windows, my heart shattered into a million pieces. Now the sun was shining and I was returning as someone Margaret had never imagined I could become. When the Ashworth estate came into view, I felt my breath catch. It was unchanged, that massive Georgian manor rising from perfectly manicured grounds like a monument to old money and older grudges. The driveway was lined with luxury cars, guests arriving for the wedding of the season. I belong here, I reminded myself. Not because of Julian, not because of Margaret, but because I am a woman who conquered everything they tried to destroy me with. I earned my place at any table in this country. Dominic reached over and squeezed my hand. His gray eyes were steady, reassuring. We have got this, Mom. I squeezed back. Yes, we do. Our car pulled up to the entrance and a valet rushed to open my door. I stepped out onto the gravel drive, my heels crunching with each step. Dominic came around to offer his arm, and together we walked toward the entrance. The moment we stepped through the doors, I felt the atmosphere shift. 400 guests filled the grand tent that had been erected on the south lawn. White roses cascaded from every surface. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Champagne flowed, laughter echoed, and the cream of New York society congratulated themselves on being important enough to be here. And then they noticed us. The whispers started immediately. I recognized faces from another life, people who had attended my wedding to Julian and then pretended not to know me after the divorce. Their expressions shifted from confusion to shock to fascination as recognition dawned. Is that... It cannot be. Vivian? Vivian Ashworth? I thought she disappeared years ago. And who is that young man with her? I kept my head high, my grip on Dominic's arm steady. Let them stare. Let them whisper. The truth was coming, one way or another. The receiving lines snaked through the grand foyer, guests waiting to greet the bride and groom, their families. And at the head of that line, holding court like the queen she believed herself to be, stood Margaret Ashworth. She had aged, of course. 21 years will do that. But she carried herself with the same imperious confidence, accepting air kisses and compliments like a monarch receiving tribute. Julian stood beside her, silver at his temples now, looking distinguished but somehow diminished. Camille was there too, thin and blonde, her smile fixed in place like a mask. And Sebastian, the groom, stood slightly apart. The son Margaret had wanted, the heir she had deemed acceptable. He was about to meet his brother. We moved through the line slowly, and I watched Margaret's face as we approached. She was greeting an elderly couple, laughing at something they said. Then her gaze drifted past them to me. Her smile froze. For just a moment before she recovered, I saw raw shock flash across her features. She had not expected me to actually come. Or perhaps she had not expected me to come looking like this, radiating success and confidence instead of defeat. But it was when her eyes moved to Dominic that real fear entered her expression. She was cataloging his features, that sharp jaw, those gray eyes, the way he carried himself. I could see her mind working, denying what was obvious, fighting against the truth that stood right in front of her. "Hello, Margaret," I said, my voice carrying clearly. "It has been a long time." Her recovery was almost imperceptible. Almost. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and arranged her features into something resembling composure. But I had seen the crack in her armor. I had seen the fear. "Vivian." Her voice was cool, measured, dripping with false pleasantness. "I was not certain you would actually come. You sent an invitation. I assumed that meant I was welcome." Her eyes flickered to Dominic again, unable to stop themselves from returning to those unmistakable features. "And who is this?" Dominic stepped forward, extending his hand with the flawless courtesy I had taught him. His posture was perfect, his expression calm, his gray eyes meeting hers with unwavering directness. "Dominic Monroe. I am Vivian's son." He did not say he was her grandson. He did not need to. The resemblance was doing all the work, screaming the truth she had spent 2 decades trying to bury. Margaret's hand trembled almost imperceptibly as she shook his. "How lovely." "I was not aware you had children, Vivian. There is quite a lot you do not know about me, Margaret." That was rather the point, was it not? Before she could respond, Julian appeared at his mother's side. He must have sensed the tension, or perhaps someone had alerted him that something was happening. His face had gone pale, his eyes darting between me and Dominic with growing confusion. "Vivian." His voice was barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "Celebrating your son's wedding, of course." I smiled, letting the words land with deliberate precision. "Well, one of your sons, anyway." The color drained from Julian's face entirely. He stared at Dominic, really stared, taking in every feature that mirrored his own. The gray eyes, the sharp jawline, the way Dominic tilted his head slightly when he was assessing a situation, exactly the way Julian himself did. "I do not understand," Camille interjected, her perfectly composed facade beginning to crack. "Julian, who is this woman?" "I am his first wife." The words came out steady, clear, designed to carry. "The one who was thrown out like garbage when I was 22 years old, pregnant with his child. The one your mother-in-law convinced everyone was an adulteress because she could not bear the thought of her precious bloodline being continued by a girl from Brooklyn who did not meet her standards." The whispers around us had swelled into a chorus. Guests were openly staring now, champagne glasses frozen halfway to lips. The receiving line had devolved into chaos, no one sure whether to stay or flee. "This is absurd," Margaret snapped, her composure finally cracking under the weight of exposure. "You were never pregnant with Julian's child. He cannot father children?" I finished for her. "That is what you told everyone, is it not? Including Julian himself. A convenient lie to ensure any pregnancy could be blamed on the unfaithful wife." I reached into my clutch and withdrew a folded document. "This is a copy of Julian's actual medical records from Dr. Bernard Holloway, obtained through legal channels after his retirement 3 years ago. Your son was never diagnosed with sterility, Margaret. You fabricated the entire thing." Margaret's face twisted with fury. She looked like a woman watching her kingdom crumble, desperately grasping for any weapon to defend herself. "You have no right to come here and spread these lies. Security. Someone call security and have these people removed immediately." But no one moved. The security guards stationed around the venue were looking at their employer with expressions of uncomfortable uncertainty. They had been hired to manage crowd control, not to physically remove guests who were clearly the wronged party in a family drama that was rapidly becoming the scandal of the decade. Julian took the document from my hand, his movements slow and uncertain. He stared at it for a long moment, his eyes scanning the medical terminology, the dates, the signatures. When he finally looked up, his expression had transformed into something I had never seen before on his face. Devastation, and underneath it, the first stirrings of rage. "Mother," his voice was barely controlled. "What is this?" "It is nothing." Margaret's voice had gone shrill. "She is lying. She always lied. That is why we had to get rid of her." "Get rid of me?" I stepped closer, my voice cutting through the chaos. "You mean frame me for an affair that never happened? Forge medical records? Convince your son that he was sterile so any child I might be carrying could be dismissed as the product of infidelity? I did what was necessary to protect this family," Margaret hissed. "You were not suitable. You were never suitable. A nobody from Brooklyn, with nothing to offer, nothing to contribute, except a son." Dominic's voice rang out, strong and clear. "She contributed a son, your grandson, the one you tried to erase before he was even born." Margaret whirled to face him, her perfectly maintained composure shattering completely. "You are not. You cannot be. Julian cannot." "Cannot father children?" Dominic smiled, and there was nothing warm in it. "You keep saying that, but here is the interesting thing about science, Mrs. Ashworth. It does not care about your lies. DNA does not lie, even when you do." He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket, holding it up for everyone to see. "This is a paternity test, conducted by one of the most respected genetic testing facilities in the country. The sample from Julian Ashworth was obtained legally from a discarded item at a public event. The results are 99.98% conclusive." He opened the envelope, removed the single sheet of paper inside. "I am Julian Ashworth's biological son. I am an Ashworth by blood, whether you acknowledge me or not. And every lie you told to prevent my existence has now been exposed for exactly what it was. A desperate attempt by a desperate woman to control a narrative that was never hers to control." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the string quartet had stopped playing. 400 guests stood frozen, witnessing the complete dismantling of Margaret Ashworth's carefully constructed reality. And then she snapped. I watched it happen in slow motion. Margaret's hand shot out, grabbing a champagne flute from a nearby server's tray. Her arm drew back. The golden liquid arced through the air. It hit my face before I could react. Cold, expensive, and deliberate. It soaked through my midnight blue gown, dripping down my chest, pooling on the marble floor beneath my heels. The gasp that went through the crowd was audible. Phones appeared from every direction, recording the moment. "You were nothing," Margaret screamed, all pretense of dignity abandoned. "Do you hear me? Nothing. A nobody from Brooklyn who tricked her way into my family. And you think you can walk in here and destroy everything I built?" I did not flinch. I did not wipe the champagne from my face. I simply looked at her, this woman who had stolen 21 years of my life, and I spoke with perfect calm. "You sent me the invitation, Margaret. You wanted me here. You wanted to parade your victory, to show me the Ashworth legacy continuing without me. You assumed I was still broken, still struggling, still the scared girl you threw out in the rain." I gestured to my ruined gown, still elegant despite the damage. "This dress is from my own collection, Lumiere. Perhaps you have heard of it. A billion-dollar fashion empire that I built from nothing. While you were playing queen in your ivory tower, I was becoming one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the country." Margaret's expression shifted, confusion mixing with the fury. "And the son you tried to erase?" I continued. "He graduated top of his class from Wharton. He speaks 4 languages. He serves as director of operations for my company. He is brilliant, compassionate, and accomplished. Everything you tried to prevent him from becoming, he became anyway. And he did it without a single cent of Ashworth money." I stepped closer to her, close enough to speak directly into her face. "You did not destroy me, Margaret. You motivated me. Every time I wanted to give up, I thought about you. I thought about the look on your face when you called my unborn child a bastard. And I worked harder. I built more. I succeeded beyond anything you could imagine." I turned to Julian, who stood frozen beside his mother. "And you believed her. You chose her lies over your own wife. You let her convince you that the woman you married, the woman you claimed to love, was capable of betraying you. You never even questioned it." Julian's face crumpled. Tears were streaming down his cheeks now. "Vivian, I did not know. I swear to you, I did not know. You did not want to know. There is a difference. I was standing right in front of you, telling you I had never been unfaithful, telling you the child was yours. But it was easier to believe your mother, was it not? Easier to let her make the decision for you. Please." Julian stepped forward, his hands outstretched. "Please, I am begging you. Let me explain. Let me try to make this right. You cannot make this right. 21 years have passed. Your son grew up without a father. I raised him alone, worked 18-hour days, built an empire while changing diapers and attending parent-teacher conferences by myself. You cannot give me back those years. You cannot give Dominic back the father he should have had." I turned to face the crowd, these society elites who had witnessed my humiliation 2 decades ago and pretended not to know me afterward. "I want everyone here to understand something. I did not come here for revenge. I did not come here to destroy the Ashworths. I came here because Margaret believed she had won. She believed her lies would last forever. And I wanted her to know, to see with her own eyes, that lies do not win. The truth always finds a way." I looked at my son, standing tall and proud beside me. "Dominic and I have built something real, something meaningful, something that will last long after the Ashworth name fades into history. We did it without inheritance, without connections, without any of the advantages Margaret tried to hoard for her chosen heir." I gestured to Sebastian, who stood shell-shocked near the altar, his bride to be gripping his arm with white-knuckled terror. "Sebastian, I do not blame you for any of this. You were a child when these decisions were made. You had no say in your grandmother's manipulations. Dominic has told me he has no interest in competing with you for the Ashworth fortune. You are as much a victim of Margaret's lies as anyone." Sebastian nodded slowly, unable to speak, clearly struggling to process everything he was hearing. I turned back to Margaret, who had collapsed into a chair, her face gray and drawn. "I hope it was worth it, Margaret. All those years of scheming, manipulating, lying, all that effort to keep me out, to erase my son. Look around you. Look at what you have done to your family. Julian trusted you, and you betrayed that trust in the worst possible way. You did not protect your family. You poisoned it." Arthur Vance stepped forward, holding another document. "Madam Chairwoman, if I may." I nodded, and Arthur addressed the crowd. "For those who may still have doubts, I am Arthur Vance, legal counsel for Ms. Monroe and the Lumiere Fashion House. In addition to the DNA evidence and medical records already presented, we have obtained testimony from 3 former Ashworth household employees who witnessed Margaret Ashworth discussing her plan to fabricate the infidelity accusations against Ms. Monroe. We also have bank records showing payments to the photographers who staged the photographs used to frame her." He handed the documents to Julian, who took them with shaking hands. "The evidence is irrefutable. Margaret Ashworth knowingly destroyed her son's marriage through fraudulent means. She slandered Ms. Monroe's character, denied Mr. Dominic Monroe his birthright, and perpetuated a medical lie that caused immeasurable psychological harm to her own son. All of this is documented, verified, and admissible in court." The room erupted in whispers that quickly grew into open discussion. I saw looks of triumph on the faces of people Margaret had wronged over the years. I saw relief on the faces of those who had suspected the truth but been too afraid to speak. I saw shock, confusion, and in some cases, shameless delight at witnessing the fall of a woman who had lorded her power over New York society for decades. Julian looked up from the documents, his expression transformed. "Mother." His voice had gone cold, harder than I had ever heard it. "You told me I could not have children. Do you have any idea what that did to me? I spent 20 years believing I was somehow broken, somehow less than a man. I mourned the children I thought I could never have. I married Camille because you said it did not matter, since I could not father children anyway. Julian, please." Margaret's voice had gone thin and desperate. "Everything I did for you, for the family. You did it for yourself." Julian stepped away from her, putting physical distance between them. "You did it because you could not stand the thought of sharing control. Vivian was young, yes, from a different background, yes, but she loved me. She genuinely loved me. And I loved her." He turned to me, and for the first time in 2 decades, I saw the man I had married, the one who had existed before Margaret's poison took hold. I threw away the best thing that ever happened to me, because my mother told me to, because I was too weak to question her, too cowardly to trust my own judgment. He looked at Dominic, tears still streaming down his face. And I missed everything. First words, first steps, first day of school, graduation, all of it. All those moments I should have been there for. Dominic stepped forward. His expression was not angry, not bitter. It was something far more complex than that. "I did not grow up hating you," he said quietly. "My mother never allowed that. She told me the truth when I was old enough to understand, but she never poisoned me against you. She said you were a victim of your own weakness, and that weakness was not the same as malice." Julian flinched at the word weakness, but he did not look away. "I had a good childhood," Dominic continued. "My mother made sure of that. She worked herself to exhaustion to give me every opportunity. She taught me what integrity looks like, what perseverance looks like, what real love looks like. I did not need your money or your name. I had something better. I had her." He glanced at me, and I saw tears threatening to spill from those gray eyes. But I would be lying if I said I never wondered, if I said I never imagined what it would be like to have a father, what it would be like to play catch in the backyard, or have someone teach me how to shave, or just have another presence in the house that shared my DNA. He turned back to Julian. "You cannot give me back those years, but you can give me answers. You can tell me who you were before all of this. You can help me understand the man my mother loved enough to marry. And maybe, if you are willing to put in the work, you can be part of my life going forward. Not as a father in the traditional sense. That ship has sailed. But as someone who finally chose to do the right thing, even if it took you 21 years. Julian nodded, unable to speak through his tears. Dominic extended his hand. His father took it, and the handshake that passed between them was the beginning of something neither of them had words for yet. Meanwhile, Margaret was being helped to her feet by 2 uncomfortable-looking guests. She had gone sheet white, swaying slightly, looking every one of her 73 years. "This is not over," she managed. "You think you have won, but you do not know what I am capable of." "Actually," I said, stepping toward her one final time, "I know exactly what you are capable of. That is why Arthur has already filed a civil suit for defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and fraud. The criminal implications of forging medical documents are being reviewed by the district attorney's office, and the evidence packet we provided to the New York Times should be hitting their website right about now. I pulled out my phone, opened the browser, and showed her the headline that had just been published. Textile heiress exposed. 20-year fraud unravels at society wedding. Margaret's knees buckled. If the guests had not been holding her up, she would have collapsed entirely. I told you, Margaret. Lies do not win. Not forever. All right, let me pause here for a moment. If you are still with me, if this story has kept you on the edge of your seat, I need you to do something. Hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear a story about truth and justice. And if you have not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another story. Now let us see how this all ends. The wedding, needless to say, did not proceed as planned. In the chaos following the confrontation, Isabella Fontaine's family demanded explanations. Her father, a prominent investment banker, was not interested in marrying his daughter into a family that was about to become the center of a massive scandal. The ceremony was postponed indefinitely while everyone tried to make sense of what had happened. I found myself in a quiet room in the east wing of the estate, the same wing where I had once dreamed of raising children with Julian. The irony was not lost on me. Dominic had gone to speak with Sebastian privately. My son understood better than anyone that Sebastian was not the enemy. They were both victims of Margaret's machinations, both manipulated by a woman who saw people as chess pieces rather than human beings. The door opened, and Julian stepped inside. He had aged so much in the past hour, the weight of 2 decades of lies suddenly visible in every line of his face. "May I sit?" he asked. I gestured to the chair across from me. We sat in silence for a long moment. Outside the window, I could see guests departing, their expensive cars forming a procession down the long driveway. The wedding of the season had become the scandal of the decade. "I do not know where to begin," Julian finally said. "I have spent 21 years believing a version of events that was completely false. I built an entire life on that foundation, a marriage, a career, an identity, and now I find out it was all constructed on lies. Your mother is very good at what she does," I said. "She is a monster." Julian's voice cracked. "I see that now. I should have seen it then. But I was so desperate for her approval, so afraid of disappointing her. She raised me to believe that her judgment was infallible, that questioning her was a betrayal of the family. I know." He looked up, surprised by my lack of anger. "I am not here to crucify you, Julian. That was never my goal. I spent years being angry, yes. I spent years fantasizing about this moment, about watching you grovel and beg for forgiveness. But somewhere along the way, I realized that holding on to that anger was only hurting me. It was not affecting you at all. You were living your life, oblivious to the truth. The anger was mine to carry. So you forgave me." I shook my head. "Forgiveness is not a light switch. It is not something I can just decide to give you. What I did was let go of the expectation that you would ever be accountable. I stopped waiting for an apology that was never coming. I focused on building a life that did not depend on your acknowledgement or your family's acceptance." Julian wiped his eyes. "That is more than I deserve, probably, but it was not about deserving. It was about survival. Every moment I spent wishing you would realize the truth was a moment I was not spending on Dominic, or on my business, or on my own healing. At some point, I had to choose, and I chose to live." Julian was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with regret. "I cannot imagine what it was like, raising him alone, building what you built, facing all of that without any support. You cannot imagine it. That is true. So I will not try to describe it to you. What matters is that Dominic turned out well. He is brilliant, kind, accomplished. He has my work ethic and your intelligence. He has the best of both of us, despite having only one of us present. I want to know him." Julian leaned forward. "Please, Vivian, whatever it takes. I know I do not deserve the chance, but he is my son, my only real son." "That is not true," I said gently. "Sebastian is your son too. He may not share your biology with Camille, but he is the boy you raised, the young man you watched grow up. Do not compound Margaret's sins by abandoning him now." Julian flinched. "You are right. Of course you are right. I just I have another son. A son I never knew, and I do not know how to process that. Slowly, I told him. You process it slowly. And you do the work. Therapy probably. A lot of uncomfortable conversations. Humility you have never had to practice before. Dominic is willing to give you a chance, but only if you earn it. And earning it means holding Margaret accountable for what she did. Julian nodded. I will. I swear to you, I will. Whatever it takes. I stood up, smoothing my champagne-stained gown. Then I guess we will see what happens next. The aftermath of that day unfolded over the following months in ways both predictable and surprising. Margaret Ashworth was removed from her position as chair of the family trust. The board, horrified by the revelations, voted unanimously to strip her of all authority. She faced a civil lawsuit that would eventually result in a significant settlement paid to Dominic, though he donated the entire amount to a scholarship fund for first-generation college students. The criminal investigation into the forged medical documents resulted in charges being filed. Margaret's attorneys negotiated a plea deal that kept her out of prison, but the terms included community service and a very public admission of wrongdoing. For a woman who had spent her entire life cultivating an image of respectability, the humiliation was punishment enough. Julian filed for divorce from Camille within a month. To everyone's surprise, she was relieved. Their marriage had been a hollow arrangement from the beginning, two people going through the motions because it was expected of them. She moved to the south of France and seemed happier than she had been in years. Sebastian's wedding eventually took place, though in a much smaller ceremony 6 months later. Isabella, after much deliberation, decided that Sebastian was not responsible for his grandmother's actions. They married quietly, and Dominic attended as an honored guest, the two half-brothers beginning a cautious but genuine relationship. And Julian and Dominic began the slow, difficult process of building something from nothing. It was not easy. There were arguments. There were setbacks. There were moments when Dominic wanted to give up, when the weight of history seemed too heavy to overcome. But there were also breakthroughs, dinners that went well, conversations that felt authentic. Gradually, something that resembled a relationship began to take shape. Julian came to my wedding to Marcus. He sat in the back, unobtrusive, watching as his son walked me down the aisle. Afterward, he approached us with tears in his eyes. "Thank you," he said, "for raising him, for making him the man he is, for giving me a chance to know him, even though I did nothing to deserve it." I accepted his thanks because it was genuine and because I had finally made peace with the past. Julian would never be my friend. Too much had happened for that. But he was Dominic's father, and that connection would always exist. Dominic continued to thrive at Lumiere. Within 2 years, he had risen to chief operating officer, and I began preparing him to eventually take over the company. Not because of nepotism, but because he was genuinely the best person for the job. He had proven himself at every level, earning the respect of employees who had watched him work his way up from entry-level positions. He also fell in love. Her name was Maya, a talented young architect he met through Marcus. They got engaged last spring, and the wedding is planned for next fall. Watching my son with the woman he loves, seeing the family he is building, fills me with a joy I cannot put into words. 5 years after that fateful wedding, I found myself standing at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. The Vivian Monroe wing of the Children's Hope Hospital gleamed in the morning sunlight, a state-of-the-art facility designed to provide world-class medical care to children from underprivileged backgrounds. It was the culmination of years of charitable work, funded by Lumiere and designed by Marcus's architectural firm. My family stood beside me. Marcus, my rock, my partner, the man who had taught me that love did not have to hurt. Dominic and Maya, radiant with the news of their first child, on the way. My parents, now in their 80s, still healthy, still proud, still unable to believe what their daughter had accomplished. And Julian, standing slightly apart but present, still doing the work, still showing up. As the ribbon fell and the crowd applauded, I noticed a figure across the street. An elderly woman, thin and frail, her once imperious posture now bent with age. Margaret Ashworth, watching from a distance, unwelcome but unable to stay away. Our eyes met for just a moment. In hers I saw regret, bitterness, and something that might have been longing. In mine, she probably saw what everyone saw now: peace, contentment. A woman who had won not by destroying her enemies, but by building a life so full that their shadows could no longer reach her. I looked away. There was nothing left to say to Margaret, nothing left to prove. She had made her choices, and she was living with the consequences. That was justice enough. Dominic appeared at my side, following my gaze. "Do you want to talk to her?" I considered the question. Part of me, a small part, felt something like pity for the old woman across the street. She had gambled everything on control, and she had lost everything that mattered. Her son barely spoke to her. Her grandson wanted nothing to do with her. The legacy she had fought so hard to protect had been irrevocably tarnished. But that pity was not my responsibility to act on. I had spent too many years carrying burdens that were not mine. I had finally learned to set them down. "No," I said, turning back to my family. "She made her choices a long time ago. I have made mine. Let us go inside. I want to see the children's faces when they see their new playroom." Dominic smiled and offered me his arm, just as he had at his grandmother's wedding 5 years ago. But this time, we were not walking into battle. We were walking into the future we had built together. As we entered the hospital, surrounded by the people I loved, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. I had been a girl with dreams too big for her circumstances. I had been a bride full of hope and trust. I had been a discarded wife, pregnant and alone. I had been a mother fighting for survival. I had been a businesswoman clawing her way to the top. And now I was all of those things and more, every struggle woven into the fabric of who I had become. The best revenge, I had learned, was not destruction. It was construction. It was building a life so beautiful, so meaningful, so full of love, that the people who tried to break you were forced to witness your joy and know they had no part in creating it. Margaret Ashworth had wanted to erase me from the Ashworth story. Instead, she had given me the motivation to write my own. And it was a story I was proud to tell. This is where I leave you today. The story of how a girl from Brooklyn was thrown away by one of the most powerful families in America, and how she rose from the ashes to build an empire, reclaim her truth, and find a love that was real. If this story moved you, if it inspired you, I need you to do 3 things for me right now. First, hit that like button. Smash it. Let me know this story resonated with you. Second, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who has been underestimated. Someone who is in the middle of their own storm. Someone who needs to know that the darkness does not last forever. Third, subscribe to Millionaire Love Stories if you have not already, and turn on those notifications. We have so many more stories like this one. Stories of love and betrayal, of struggle and triumph, of people who refuse to let their circumstances define them. Drop a comment below and tell me, what would you have done if you received that wedding invitation? Would you have gone? Would you have brought your son? I want to hear your thoughts. And remember this, because it is the most important lesson Vivian's story teaches us. Your value is not determined by those who cannot see it. It is determined by what you build when they are not watching. So keep building, keep growing, keep becoming the person who makes your enemies wonder how they ever thought they could break you. Until next time, this has been Millionaire Love Stories with Mr. Shawn. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next one.